Hello and welcome everyone. We'll get started here shortly, but I'd like to give you a few more moments to get your audio preferences settled before we begin. All right, well, hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before I hand it off to the presenters, I just want to do some housekeeping, provide you some details in case you haven't joined an ACRO webinar in the past. It is like a Zoom webinar, except that your cameras and your microphones are disabled by default, and you can communicate with the panelists and with each other using two buttons. One is the chat button, and the other one is a Q&A button. If you could ask your questions using the Q&A button, that would help out the presenter answer your questions. You can ask your questions anonymously, and you can ask it at any time. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it off to Sarah.
Hello and welcome to the Identifying and Coping with Burnout webinar today, hosted by the ACRO Women's Caucus. My name is Sarah Kessler, and I'm the Associate Registrar at the University of Georgia, and I'm also the Chair of the Women's Caucus. So thank you very much for joining us today. The Women's Caucus was founded in 2018 with the mission to be able to support professional development, networking, community building, and discussion of issues specific to all women. So we hope that this fits right in with that mission for you. Our membership is open to ACRO members who are interested in promoting scholarship, empowering and developing all women, and to anyone who identifies outside of the cisgender constructs in higher education. We encourage leadership development with the goal of contributing to both ACRO and to the general field of higher education. So if you're not yet a member of the Women's Caucus, I really encourage you to join so that you can continue to be in the know, so we can share content and support with you. So I'm going to post a link for that here in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our moderator for today, Melissa Manuel, so that she can proceed with introducing our speaker.
Hi there, my name is Melissa Manuel, and I am the co-chair of professional development of the Women's Caucus for ACRO, University Registrar of Neom University in Saudi Arabia, and PhD student at Indiana State University. Following the COVID pandemic, we in higher education experienced a tremendous increase in stress, and it is likely that either ourselves or someone we know has or is coping with workplace burnout. I am therefore so pleased to present our speaker today, who will provide perspectives on post-pandemic workplace trends and its impact on women employees, and identifying the mental, emotional, and physical effects of burnout and the related strategies for coping with workplace burnout. Laura Beth Dawes, LBD, is the founder and president of LBD Communications. She has a BA in public communication from the University of North Alabama, an MA in communications from Auburn University, and PhD in communications from the University of Kentucky. She spent 17 years as a professor teaching courses at the graduate and undergraduate level in public speaking, communication skills, team communication, business communication, media studies, and research methods, and became nationally recognized for her work in innovative online and in-person classroom teaching strategies. She taught thousands of students to be better communicators through engaging and interacting lectures and courses. She ultimately was promoted to the position of interim director for the Kennesaw State University School of Communication and Media, supervised 70 faculty and staff, and managing curriculum for 4 undergraduate bachelor programs, 1 graduate master's program, and multiple certificates and minors, serving 1,600 students. While in academic leadership, she developed and facilitated numerous faculty training programs related to online education and pedagogical skills. She left academia in June of 2022 to start her own consulting firm, working in the areas of training and development, leadership coaching, business strategy, and workforce development. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Laura Beth.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah and Velma and Melissa. Melissa, thank you for that introduction. I have here just to reinforce on the slide a little bit about myself with the Kennesaw State University mascot, the owl, which I took while I was still a professor. But I'm so pleased to see all of you here. Your time is so valuable, and I just appreciate you spending some of it with me today while we talk about an issue that I think will strike a chord with a number of us. Even though I left academia formally last year, my consulting business has actually taken me towards many academic clients, and I still work in higher education broadly. So I've maintained my connections there, and really been paying attention to a lot of trends across the country in higher education. And I'm really thankful to be able to talk about burnout specifically, because out of all the trends that I'm seeing, exhaustion and burnout is one of the most disturbing trends I think I'm seeing among all of my colleagues who are still working in academia, and really in corporate America too. But I think academia as an institution presents some unique challenges, and I want to talk about those today. This can be a very dark topic. We'll talk through some of the things about burnout specifically that make it a really scary issue. But I'm an optimist at heart, and so I hope that you get something positive out of this. A burnout, even if you're experiencing just really deep burnout and symptoms with burnout, I hope that you know that it can actually be a force for good in your life. One of the reasons I left academia was partly due to burnout. And I'll share bits and pieces of my story as we go along and tell you really what happened to me and how I recognized burnout in my own life and what I did about it. So I hope that if you are here and you're experiencing burnout or emotional exhaustion, or you just don't know what to do, you're at wit's end, let's talk about some things that might help you figure out what your next move is, because there's always a next move, and there's always a way to change any environment that you're in to make things better for yourself. So even though this can be a very serious and dark topic, and it is, I'm an optimist, so let's hopefully find some ways to make this better for you. So a little preview for you today about what we'll talk specifically about. I'll give you a little historical perspective on women at work in general. I think it's important to start with just the historical context, which many of you, especially if you have studied gender and women's studies before, as I have, a lot of this research you already sort of know, but it's always a good refresher to go through what's historically or some of the factors that have contributed to women especially being burnout in academia. We'll talk about emotional labor. We'll also talk about how to identify if you are burned out. The dialogue and discourse on burnout is pretty popular right now. And I know that I see articles daily that talk about burnout and what to do about it. And I think it bears a discussion about how to identify if you really are truly burned out or if something else is going on, and hopefully towards the end, what to do about it. As I was preparing this presentation and going through some of the research, it struck me how heteronormative and cisgendered a lot of the research is on women in the workplace and women in families and women in homes. And so I just want to acknowledge that perspective too before I get started, because I believe that as our gender roles change and as sex roles change and as our society starts to adopt different practices and our standards start to change, I think a lot of the research might change as well. A lot of it hasn't fully caught up with all the different family dynamics we have in place now across the country and across the world. But I did want to acknowledge that perspective and let you know that the research I present, if it comes across as cisgendered, heteronormative, know that that was not trying to make that the focus of our discussion today, but it is where a lot of the research originated. And I think that if you identify as a woman for whatever reason, then some of what we talk about will be true for you. And this also can spill over and impact men as well. But I've targeted my audience today for women in academia specifically. So that's where my talk will pretty much land. So let's get started by talking about the second shift. I happened to read Arlie Hochschild's book, The Second Shift, whenever I was in graduate school. I think I was 23 years old, and I'd literally never considered the work that my mom and my grandmother and my aunts did at home as work. And this was the first time I really considered how much work in the upbringing I had, women were supposed to do at home. So historically, we know this, women have been expected to just do more at home. And the reason I bring that up here is because this sociocultural expectation really impacts women in professional organizations as well. In academia especially, I saw this often. Women tend to bear the brunt of the service work that is done done in academia. And my perspective in academia, I was a faculty member and in administration and leadership, and service was part of my job responsibilities. It was supposed to be, I think, 10% of my job, and I think I ended up spending close to 50% of my job on service. And I'm guessing a lot of you in the audience have that same experience or that same feeling that you are expected to serve your community and serve the academic community, and you're excited about that on some level. But this service work can get overwhelming, and a lot of times it's unseen, it's not publicly recognized, and you end up eventually doing unpaid emotional labor, just like in the home. If you are in a home where you have family, you have children, or you're a caretaker of elderly relatives or friends, what we fall into in the workplace are these other duties as assigned trap. I know every job description I ever had as a faculty member had a clause that gave me my teaching load and gave me my research expectations and service expectations. And then there was this line at the end that said other duties as assigned. And that's where the second shift starts to come in and where our sociocultural perspective starts to come in. Women tended, in my experience, to see more duties assigned to them that weren't technically part of their job. And let me give you a short list of some of the things that either I did or my female colleagues ended up doing on a regular basis that relates to the emotional labor part of academia. Even though academia is different than corporate America, there's still a lot of corporate issues that spill over. There are still events that need to be planned. Remembering birthdays. Anytime a colleague was sick, a woman was always the one, in my experiences, to organize donations for that. Or if a colleague was having a baby, a woman was always the one to organize a baby shower or a gift or create invitations for events. They ended up doing the bulk of the work of most events. This is all some physical labor, but emotional labor as well. And we'll unpack what this means in the workplace too. A lot of times women in the workplace, especially in academia, end up being the listeners, being the ones who do a lot of emotional support, just to support colleagues who are stressed out, especially if you are a staff member who happens to have a front-facing position, if you happen to be in a front office, or you don't have a cubicle, or you don't have a door that you can close and lock yourself away for a minute, you might end up being the one who knows what's going on because everyone tells you, even if you don't want to know. A lot of times women are disproportionately expected to deal with the difficult students or difficult parents. A lot of times women are the ones on the phone trying to calm down people who are in emotional distress, or my favorite, the quick question that is never a quick question that ends up maybe taking 5 minutes to answer, but the context switching can take an hour to recover from. You might have been in the middle of a project, someone comes by to ask a quick question, they leave, and it takes you another 20 minutes to get refocused back on your task. So these are just some of the things that I tended to see women do more than my male colleagues in academia. And we'll have a chance throughout this presentation for you to think about if you've had to do any of these activities, or you've seen your female colleagues do these activities, and what it all means, and how these are actually some factors that contribute to burnout in academia. Just, this is exhausting work, and a lot of times it disproportionately falls to women, or that historical context, because women are usually expected to do more. So this is systemic. It is a problem across campuses, across institutions, and I put unintentional in quotation marks. Women tend to take on more emotional and physical labor gradually. In my experiences, and the research shows that most women don't sign up to be the party planner for their office. What happens is it happens once, maybe twice, and then all of a sudden that becomes your job. And I also don't want to give the impression that I'm trying to say that men are out to get women and keep us down. That's not what I mean. I've seen women be disproportionately given harder workloads from female bosses as well. So a lot of this is just systemic. What happens is somebody does a good job and they continue to get asked to do that type of emotional labor over and over, because it really is important in academia. Otherwise, the workplace can be really dull and it can be stressful, and there almost always needs to be a stress relief. And that's the emotional labor component that women have historically tended to do more than men. And also our social structure supports this. If women have historically been the caretakers in our families and in our partnerships and in our friend circles, Why should the workplace be any different? It's very difficult for people to context switch that drastically. So that's where this historical perspective really comes into play and where the systemic problem starts. It really does start with different social structures and the way that we've been conditioned to believe women are supposed to act at home and in the workplace. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of all of this added emotional labor that we're carrying around as women. Hochschild clarified in a 2018 interview with The Atlantic that emotional labor really means being hired and monitored for your capacity to manage and produce a feeling. And that really stuck with me when I read it, that it's emotional labor is all about feelings. And of course, I've studied gender roles, as many of you have in the room. And historically, women are the ones who are expected to care about the emotional component of whatever's happening in an organization. Gemma Hartley popularized a broader conception of women with emotional labor. This article in Harper's Bazaar was great. Women aren't nags, we're just fed up. She defined emotional labor as the unpaid and often unnoticed and unrecognized labor that goes into keeping everyone around you comfortable and happy. Again, a lot of times this starts with patterns from childhood or patterns from family structures that you grow up seeing and repeating without even thinking about it. But it takes energy, even if it's unseen energy. Any of you who have ever planned any of the events I just went through or listen to everybody complain because a policy changed at work and everybody's mad and they come to you to vent, probably have had that feeling at the end of the day when you go home and you are extra tired and you're not sure why, but you look at your pile of actual work you need to do and it's growing and you don't really understand why either. All of this takes actual energy and it can be a real drain. And I also really didn't fully recognize this until I started diving into the world of emotions for my own personal benefit and seeing just the impact that it could really have. So we'll get to that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. One example of this I love to bring up is about list and family management. Just a little bit about my personal background and perspective. I am married and I have an 8-year-old son. And whenever I read about the concept of carrying that family list in your head, it really struck a chord with me. A sectoral study, and this has been repeated too, showed that women tend to do more what's known as mental housework than men in heteronormative marriages and partnerships, which means that it's not like vacuuming the floors or cleaning the counters, but that mental housework is basically a habitual action where you're keeping track of everything that is going on in your home. I bet if I asked in here, a good number of you could tell me right now all the groceries that you need to get. That's on a list somewhere, but you have it in your head. And anytime you need to add an item to it, it mentally pops into your head. Or maybe you might not be the person in your home who cooks dinner every night, but I bet you know what you're having for dinner. Those are examples of lists relating to family management, where you just keep track of birthdays, you keep track of events, you remember who needs what sports gear on what day and who needs to go where. There's a lot of administrative work that goes into family management. Also read a statistic recently that blew my mind. I wasn't really aware of the concept of a house manager until I came across it in a book. And if you are a house manager for a family, that can be a 6-figure occupation. So if you are in this area, if you happen to be a spouse or a mom or both, and you're running a household, just know that there are some families who pay 6-figure salaries for people to do just what you're doing. And I bet a lot of you are not getting a 6-figure salary to run your household every day. It is work, it is emotional work, it is physical work, and it takes a toll. And all of this can spill over into the workplace as well, especially if that's just what you do at home. It can feel like just what you're supposed to do in the workplace. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk specifically about some trends post-pandemic that are really disturbing that have also contributed to burnout. Leanin.org did some really interesting research about what happened during the pandemic. They found that during COVID, women spent 7.5 more hours a week on childcare than men and 5 hours a week more on elderly or sick care. And women spent 7 hours a week more on housework than men. So if you add it up, that can be an additional 20 hours a week alone during the pandemic, just on caring for other people and for housework alone, on top of all of the added responsibilities that came with everyone's job during the pandemic, because the world was just a crazy place and no one knew what was going on. Black and Latino women have experienced disproportionate burdens in this area. They experienced 21 hours additional a week on housework and up to 12 hours a week additional on childcare. So there are some racial demographics that play in here too. So what we're talking about here during COVID is really an 18 months to 2 year, maybe stretching into 3 year stretch of time where women have disproportionately taken on additional labor that is unpaid, that takes a toll. Again, it's not that there is a man in your house necessarily telling you to take care of the child and forcing you into it. It's, again, historical and social structures that support this. And I'm guessing a lot of you maybe had jobs that were flexible in some way and you figured out a way to make it work. Someone's still got to feed your family. Someone's got to take care of sick kids or sick relatives or sick friends and do the housework. And a lot of times that disproportionately falls to women, especially during COVID, during the pandemic. This also resulted in some pretty serious workplace shifts in academia. So just generally some statistics that are very sobering about this. The global workforce was impacted by COVID. There were 1.1 million deaths in the United States alone due to COVID, according to the World Health Organization. So that's 1 million workers who are no longer in the workforce, people who, and the loss that goes along with that, that's 1.1 million families who were impacted by a loss that is tragic. That also tended to result, not just with the deaths, but with people resigning from workplaces and from shifting priorities. Close to 2 million fewer workers in the United States than we had before the pandemic, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So I don't have to tell you that there is a labor shortage. I think that's well documented and we're aware of that. What is it that contributed to all this, though, in addition to just the deaths and the tragic losses? There's been a lot of collective post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma that I think sociologists and psychologists and therapists are just now starting to investigate. This happened to adults, obviously, but the research on how it impacted children is also pretty scary. What we've seen is a continued lack of access to affordable childcare. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and a major metro area. Childcare is not cheap around here. So we just as a country have never been able to really support women in childcare, and that makes it very difficult for women to continue their jobs in a lot of ways. We've also seen shifted priorities and work-life balance for the pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of women in particular started to look at their lives a little differently, and the priorities that they had tended to shift in some areas. Some people became more career focused, and some people decided that their priorities needed to shift more towards the family or towards the home, or the expense of childcare just became too much to bear. And so they realized it would be better for their families to not work instead and then take care of children. We also saw a shift towards early retirements because of the economic upheaval and the economic shifts. A lot of companies encourage people to retire early. So we've seen people who have left the workplace. We've seen budgets reduced, and that has contributed to some pretty major shifts in academia, of course, in the corporate world as well. But here's what's special about academia. I don't have to tell you how slow things move, how difficult it can be to hire someone. When someone in your office or your department or among your faculty leaves, it can take a year, if not multiple years, to replace that position. And so I argue that in academia, these workplace shifts are much more of a problem than they are in corporate America, where it's presumably easier and faster to hire employees if you need to fill a vacancy. What happens in academia oftentimes is job responsibilities left by these vacancies get shifted elsewhere. I saw this happen among my own staff. Whenever I was the director of the School of Communication and Media, we had several staff in my office and in other areas resign, and that impacted everyone on staff in my entire collegiate unit because academia is so interconnected. For example, personnel changes in the registrar's office or advising is going to directly impact faculty and students, and that impacts everyone's workload. And a lot of times the responsibilities that are shifted when someone leaves are shifted to a woman who's already probably overworked because other people have resigned as well, or she took on new duties because she'd been in that position for years and was competent and great at her job and looked like she could handle everything. Another reason is that policy changes quickly in academia. So we change our policies pretty quickly, but we are very slow to hire people. So if you are in a large organization, a large institution, it can be very difficult to manage and keep up with the rapid changes. So all of this together can contribute to a feeling of craziness, a lack of control, and just really being overworked in the first place. So I want to pause for a moment here, and we're going to hold our discussion until the end. Melissa's going to tell me if there's anything in the chat she wants to interject immediately, but I want you to pause and think for a moment. You don't have to put this in the chat. You can just jot this down on a notebook, or if you're watching on your laptop, type a note. But see if you can think of anything you've been asked to do that's beyond what your job description is, that may have taken time from other tasks that you feel were more important or even more work-oriented, or maybe even was something that would have been more beneficial for you to spend your time on. Just take a second and think about if there's anything that falls into that category for you. I know whenever I was in academia, I certainly could have listed out a number of things on that list. And also I want you to take a second and just think, how many minutes out of your day do you estimate you spend on additional or emotional labor at work? If anything I've said about emotional labor seems to resonate with you, if you had to estimate how much time of your day are you spending on additional work and or that emotional labor? I'll give you just a second to think about that. And you obviously won't have to share your answers unless you just want to, but towards the end, when we have our discussion, this can be a really good place for us to go back and start a discussion about specific things that maybe you've seen happen in your workplace or among your other female colleagues. So just take a second and jot down anything you've been thinking of that is beyond your job description that you're currently doing, something that may have taken time from other tasks, and how many minutes out of your day you might spend on additional work. All right. Won't spend too much time on it because I'm guessing some of you could write on this for an hour. So we'll move on, continue to think as we go through. If anything pops up that you want to consider, definitely add it to your list. Let's move into talking a little bit. How do you identify burnout? Is it boredom? Is it burnout? Are you tired? Is something else going on? A couple ways to tell if it's boredom versus burnout. One of the best descriptions I've seen about this, maybe you're not burnout, maybe you're just bored. Boredom tends to be if you are understimulated. Burnout is when you're overstimulated. So that can be one way to identify if you're truly burned out or if you're just bored. Maybe you've just had some things at work that have lingered and have been responsibilities that you've done for a long time and you're just tired of them. We tend to get really efficient at our jobs the longer we do them. So, you know, if you're feeling like work is unfulfilling in some way, I think this really what we're talking about generally, a work that feels like it's unfulfilling. But whether it's boredom or burnout, the result can actually be the same. Boredom and burnout can cause some of the same feelings, like a lack of purpose, a lack of energy, maybe a lack of creativity, a lack of purpose, or even just exhaustion or feeling like you're stuck, feeling like you're unsure. How can you really tell if it's boredom versus burnout? Well, unfortunately, only you can tell for sure. I will go through some emotional and physical factors that you might look at, but one way to tell is to consider your purpose. Whenever you are thinking about whether you're bored or burnout, a lot of times one way to tell is to think about what is it that brought you to this job in the first place or this institution in the first place? You were probably at one point excited about the work that you were doing. And if there's some of that excitement still there, it's possible you're not burned out. It is possible you're just bored, or maybe you need to move into another unit or get that promotion that you've been wanting for a while. Maybe you need a new project or a new challenge. It could just be boredom. Because a lot of times the feelings that each of these brings up are about the same. I'll give you an example from my own personal life, just a little bit more about my background. I taught at 3 different institutions full-time during my time as a professor. I started out at a 2-year college in Northeast Georgia, loved it, had a fantastic experience. I just wanted to teach more courses and was able to teach at a 2-year college, so moved to a 4-year university down the road. that was a polytechnic institution. I loved that environment too. I worked with engineering students primarily and tried to teach them how to be better public speakers, and I loved that challenge. And I wanted to be the best professor I could possibly be. I said yes to everything. I got invited to join all these committees and all these task forces and create new courses and update materials, and I did it all. In fact, I even asked to teach night classes so that I would have the whole work day to be with my colleagues and to work and to do committee work. And that's saying something because I'm not a night person. I go to bed at 9:15 every night. So I was just all in. And I had a next door neighbor office mate who had been at that institution for over 20 years. And she came to my office one day and she said, "You're going to burn yourself out. You have to calm down. You have to slow down." And I said, "Kim, no, I'm good. I've got this." And when I finally did burn out for the last time, I thought about those words. I thought, Kim was right. She was 100% right. So at first, I was excited. I wasn't bored. And all the work I was doing was a heavy workload. I didn't feel burnout. I was really excited and energetic. So think about if you still have that enthusiasm for your position, maybe the role is just a little different than you thought it would be. It might not be burnout. It might just be boredom, or it might be misplaced energies, or it might be you got hired for a job that didn't exactly line up with the description. Only you can really tell for sure. But when we're talking about burnout, one surefire way to tell if you really are burned out, the World Health Organization defines burnout as when job-related stressors are not being effectively managed by the normal rest that you find on work breaks, weekends, and just regular time off. I think we all can probably think about a colleague who, and maybe this is you too, needs a vacation. You need a week out of the office and you'll come back refreshed and better. You might be burned out if you take your week vacation and you come back and it's still just as bad. You feel as exhausted and bored and cynical as you did before. And the American Psychological Association says that burnout really results into some pretty serious psychological and mental health issues. Energy depletion or emotional exhaustion. This is probably the first one. You just become so exhausted because there's sort of this disconnect in your brain. You're doing a job, you're getting a paycheck, you're supporting yourself and your family. You know that's important. You know the work that you do is important, but the disconnect comes in because you are asked to do so much more work. You're doing more with less. And you know in your heart that's not right, and you don't see a way out of it. So that energy depletion is one of the first ways to know you might be burnout. Another way to tell is that you might have an increased mental distance from work and really negative feelings towards work. I remember in the early days of my tenure as a professor, nothing really bothered me. I was very excited, even when things went sort of wrong. It was fine. I knew everything would be okay. And towards the end, the tiniest thing would really make me upset and set me off. And I started to build all this resentment towards work. So it's deeper than just negative feelings. It can actually latch on as resentment and make it hard to show up and hard to do your job. You might even have a reduced sense of efficacy. The things that you used to be able to do quickly and effectively and efficiently, it's like pulling teeth to get you to do. And you know you can do this work, you know you're competent, you know you're good at your job, but you just feel like something's missing. Something's not there that was there before. So burnout can be very serious. I like to blog, and in one of my blog posts, I'm talking about burnout and deal breakers that with workplace and relationships. To cope with my own burnout, I used to take a lot of trips. I love to travel, and I eventually realized there are not enough girls' weekends in a year to deal with an unhealthy or toxic work environment that causes burnout. So if you're in that place too, if you've tried everything, you feel like you've taken breaks and they're not helping, you really might be burned out from your job. So don't panic. We'll get to how to fix it and some things to do later. Other causes of workplace burnout. This is an interesting one. Think about the perceived loss of control. Sometimes burnout happens because we feel like we have very little control over our environment or workloads. And this happens in academia often, especially if you happen to be in an academic unit where leadership has changed hands multiple times. One of the other impacts of COVID on academic leadership is that we start to see, it feels like musical chairs sometimes with higher administration. So if you have seen in your own workplace, leadership changes really quickly at especially a dean level or a vice president level or above, you might feel a sense of lack of control. And that can really cause burnout really quickly, because it's very difficult for you to do your job if you don't know what the rules are. And it's very difficult to come in every day and perform well if you feel like the rug's constantly being pulled out from under you. So another cause, if looking at this, if you're trying to figure out if you're just bored or just unhappy or really burnt out, if you feel out of control, you really might be burnout. Also, a lack of rewards. I know in academia, especially, none of us in here are in it for the money. If we are, we're probably in the wrong field. But there are certain rewards that come with academic work. And I think on some level, that's probably what attracted all of us to higher education in the first part. Sometimes burnout can happen whenever you just don't feel like you have any ability to get rewards at all. So that could be compensation, it could be recognition. I know whenever I was managing so many different faculty and I was doing annual reviews, I started to feel powerless too in all of this, because I realized it didn't matter how hard my faculty were working, there were so few rewards that I could give to my faculty. There was no way for me personally to guarantee a promotion or a raise or anything more. And it's demoralizing, and that can burn you out really quickly, because you are doing your best, you're doing hard work, and what's the reward? It almost feels pointless. Now, it can also be a misalignment with corporate values. So another way to think about this is if you happen to realize that your professional values are not aligned with the institution's values, or if you've had leadership changes resulting in policy changes that result in some sort of entire personality shift of your university, in another way to think about it, that can be very difficult and can be hard to manage from a burnout perspective too. I know that happened to me as well too. The institution I worked at, I ended up at an institution because through a consolidation with another university. And the values of the university where I ended up going to were totally different than the small polytechnic that I previously was at. And as hard as you try to make it work, at some point, if you don't align with those values professionally, it can be very difficult to show up and work every day. So workplace burnout can be caused by a misalignment of values as well. How to really truly recognize it too. Emotional and physical symptoms can accompany it. It's different, again, as I've been saying, than just boredom or just regular exhaustion. This is something that's on a deeper level, more than just unhappy with your job. It's like a discontent that can spill over and really have big problems for yourself. Some really scary statistics on this. It can feel very stormy. We just don't have a storm cloud here. 100%, 180% increased risk of depression if you are burnout at the workplace, increased risk of diabetes, hypertension, memory and attention problems, constant feelings of anger, frustration, or anxiety. If you find yourself being short with your colleagues or short with people you work with or work around for things that you recognize, especially if they're not that big of a deal, but you still get really worked up about them. Constant physical issues, stomach aches, headaches, extreme tiredness, lethargic, loss of sleep. This is a serious problem. And I know I had colleagues who experienced these issues, and it was very difficult for them to show up and do their jobs. Hopefully none of you in this room have experienced this, but statistics show that most of us probably do experience some physical symptoms if we are truly burned out. Your body will let you know whenever you need a break. And as women, especially, a lot of times we're taught to discredit those thoughts inside our head. We're taught to ignore the physical symptoms we're having and keep going because we have a kid that needs to be fed, or we have a partner or spouse to watch out for, or we're caretaking a parent or elderly relative. And a lot of times those physical symptoms will end up hurting you longer in the long run. So it's important to pay attention to those symptoms if you're having them. Probably the biggest thing for me too, in addition to all of these physical symptoms, mentally, I've noticed burnout colleagues start to hold themselves back. Eventually, you physically feel so bad, you're so tired, you're so burnt out. Some of us tell ourselves we're not worth a better job, a better work-life balance. You might even hold yourself back from opportunities that would allow you to move forward because of the depression you're experiencing, because of the physical symptoms that you've experienced, or because your job has gaslit you enough and made you believe that this is the only job you could ever do. I find this to be true in academia more than corporate America, because a lot of times in academia, we latch on to this idea that we are here serving a mission. We are serving others, we are serving students, and that is an important part of our job. What becomes a problem is when we feel like that is more important than our own personal health and well-being and physical safety. So I've noticed colleagues as well who were burnout. And even when I was in academia, the most burnout among us, I remember having conversations like, look, you're talented, you've got a skill set, here's a job for you down the road. And people would talk themselves out of applying because they were uncertain and unsure. And that a lot of times is the emotional exhaustion talking. It's not that they don't want something better. It's really hard to motivate yourself. I want you to pause and think here too, as we are talking about some sober information here. If you've experienced any symptoms of workplace burnout in the last 3 to 6 months that we've just talked about, maybe jot down what they were. Again, I don't expect you to share this in the chat or share this personally, attach your name to it, but just for your own self-reflection, as we continue to go through this, have you experienced any of these symptoms of burnout, more than just boredom, more than just unhappiness with your job? If you have experienced some of those symptoms, jot them down. Sometimes writing them down actually helps identify how to move forward and how to improve from there. So a little bit about my story too. I've told you bits and pieces about it. I stayed very busy in my job. And how did I recognize I was burned out? How did I recognize these symptoms? I was a high achiever. I was an award-winning faculty member. I solved all the problems I could in my organization. I got lots of praise from various groups. I had an ego the size of Montana as a result of all this, and really truly loved a lot of my job as a faculty member and administrator. I felt like I was helping students graduate. I felt like I was really helping the next generation learn. I loved the discipline of communication was my discipline. Loved talking about it, so much about my job that I loved. And on top of it, I was tenured. I have a brother who works in staff at a community college, and he's tenured too. So I don't know how many of you here who are staff or faculty that are tenured, but once you get some level of job security, you can do a lot of mental gymnastics to make you think you need to stay. The biggest of all for me, I felt like my identity was tied to being a professor. Maybe your identity is tied to your workplace as well. You are a registrar, you are an advisor, you are an admissions officer, and this is what you do. These are the type of jobs you'll find in the future. But the stress of this workplace and the stress of what I was trying to do was really taking its toll on me. I had just taken on too much, and also was essentially being told I wasn't doing enough when I knew I was. And I never got a clear sense of what enough really would be. And that's where my burnout started. I care very deeply about doing a good job, and didn't really understand how I was supposed to do that. So what happened was I acted like everything was great at work, put on a smiling face, was happy to be there. Things are great. We can do this. We can get through any problem. And I would get in the car to go home. And on that drive home, my personality just shifted. I remember I sometimes would just go to bed. I wouldn't even have the energy to eat dinner with my family. Didn't want to see friends. I backed out of social engagements. And that's really strange for me because I'm a very social extrovert, but it just became too difficult. And that's how I knew something was wrong for me. I used to do all kinds of things to mentally escape. I used to imagine angry conversations with people I would never have. I stopped sleeping, was short with my family, and then I got sick. I got physically ill. The last 6 months I worked in academia, I had a sinus infection that would not go away, and I tend to be a very healthy person. I run a lot, I eat healthy, I cook for myself, I just like doing that, and I've never been that sick before, ever in my adult life. And that was another sign for me that I needed to really change. I looked around and I saw that other people were in the same boat, and I thought, if I don't do something different, I'm not going to be okay. My life is too valuable to sit here and be sick all the time. I also want you to think too, how you're coping with your burnout. If you are burnout, have you adopted any behaviors in an effort to help you deal with work that maybe are impacting other areas of your life? Before I had a child, before I had a family, one of the things I used to do to deal with just exhaustion from work was, ironically, endurance athletic events. I literally tried to run away from my problems. So maybe that's something you're doing too. Think about what you're doing to try to cope with your burnout, because if you are burnout, you're probably doing something to try to avoid it or try to deal with it and try to cope. So let's talk about some coping strategies, because once you recognize your burnout, it's almost like crossing a bridge you can't uncross. It's seeing something you can't unsee. when you really fully accept that whatever you've been trying to do to cope is not working, it's really time to make some pretty serious changes. And that's terrifying. Change is very scary. Let's talk about what that might look like. I was fortunate enough to get to change careers. I have a very supportive spouse and was willing to take a risk financially to try something new, and went for it and completely overhauled my life. And it worked out great for me. I can't always recommend that as a strategy. Everybody has different financial factors involved and family factors involved. But what I can tell you is that there are ways to make changes. And if you are burned out, it's important to change in some way. Let's talk about how you might start to change. So one thing you could do, if you're in a position where you feel like you can't leave your position, you feel like you can't find a new position or change something drastically, try to regain some control. Identify something in your environment, even if it's a small thing, to try to regain some control over the environment or work world. Maybe it's a task that you actually need to be doing yourself that's been delegated to somebody else. Is there something in your workload that you can somehow regain control over? Or is there an aspect of your job you can regain control over? If you are a supervisor or you're in leadership, talk to your employees about this. I know we've got people on the call who have direct reports. If you care about this topic, have an honest and vulnerable conversation with your employees. It's very difficult and hard to do, but listen to them. See if you can come up with things that might help. Maybe there are things at the workplace you could do to help with burnout, and that has to come from your employees. Maybe there's not, but I think if you had an honest conversation with people who work with you or for you about what resources they need to do their job, what would be helpful to alleviate burnout, see what you can do. Ask your people who are working in you, because every work environment's a little bit different and everyone has different perspectives on what would be helpful. And it might not be realistic, but as a supervisor or manager or leadership, acknowledge the problem can go a long way. At least the people who work with you know that you care and know that you're aware of the issue. If you're an employee, maybe you're not in leadership, take stock of your workload. See if you can find a few minutes to really just list out what you're doing in your environment, and see if there's things you can say no to or wrap up, or a way to alleviate your work. Sort of do a work inventory. What is it that you're doing? Really sit down and make a list of everything that you're doing every day. And you can present that to your boss or your manager and say, look, here's what I do. A lot of times, remember, that labor that you're doing is unseen, unacknowledged, not rewarded. Maybe go to your supervisor and say, here are the things I'm doing. I'm feeling burnout. Something has to change, or something else is going to happen as a result of this. See if there's something you can alleviate in your job. Emotional labor changes. This is a really hard one. I definitely recommend working with a therapist if you are recognizing that you have a hard time identifying boundaries around workplace emotional disclosure. If you've got some nonverbal strategies, again, I used to love to teach nonverbal and verbal communication. There are ways you can sort of put a buffer around yourself. If you are that person that people come and talk to you all the time, nonverbal strategies, this will feel mean, but it might work. Wear headphones at work. And unless you are required to look up and say hello to everybody that comes in the office, headphones are a surefire way to signal I'm busy. Stay focused on your screen, maybe glance up quickly or just give a brief hello without making eye contact. Basically try to avoid engaging with the people who are that energy drain on you and are expecting you to be a counselor. That can go a long way in preventing some of that emotional exhaustion at the end of the day. Try your hardest to avoid participating in somebody else's problems or negativity. It happens a lot in academia too, with gossip, lack of information, to the best of your ability. I know this sometimes is, you're sitting here thinking this is not realistic. Sometimes it's not realistic, but if you are in a situation where you could cut out some of this, it might go a long way in helping you start to feel a little better, or at least give you the emotional space to be a little bit easier on yourself and do things like journaling, giving yourself the space to write down what's going on. Sometimes we process things by writing. So journaling can really help you figure out if you need a career change and overhaul, or if there are just changes in the workplace that might help. If there are situations that minor adjustments might actually help you feel a little bit better. Maybe it's not even career related. It could just be related to yourself or your home or other issues in your life. Mindfulness and meditation are very important too. If you can take 10 minutes out of your day to just sit quietly, a lot of people are unsure about meditation or they think they're doing it wrong, especially in academia. We want to do things right. I started a meditation practice a few years ago, and I always like to do things right. There's not really a right way to do it. A lot of people tell me they don't even want to try to meditate because their brains won't shut up anyway, and so it's pointless. That's not the point. The point is to practice. Eventually it does get a little bit easier. If you don't have 10 minutes, maybe we don't have 10 minutes, 1 minute of mindful breathing will help. If you just close your eyes, close the door, just for a minute, see if that helps. Start with 1 minute, and then maybe the next day you have 2 minutes, and then maybe the next day you have 3. It's a habit that is good to practice, and the benefits build on each other the longer that you do them. Lastly, I know this sounds might not always be realistic, but go back to the fact that the work that you do is important. Sometimes remembering the mission and what you're doing helps. It is not a cure for burnout. And I don't want this to come across sounding like in order to deal with burnout, you need to just remind yourself that what you're doing is important. Not at all. But this can help in an environment where you maybe aren't able to make a big life change. See what about your job you can find that maybe is okay for that day. You can sometimes mitigate some burnout symptoms by focusing on what parts of your job that you find rewarding or helpful or useful. It's very difficult to do this if we are stuck, if we feel like we're cynical and resentful. And if you can't get here, you are definitely burned out and probably need a drastic career change in order to get out of that situation. This involves a high degree of emotion management and compartmentalization. And again, not always realistic, not always the best strategy, but it also can help you identify if you get to the point where you can't do this, that's really where you need to take stock of your life and figure out what to do differently. This is also what really did me in at my last position. I have always been able to be a supporter of whatever department I was part of and whatever programs I was running. And at one point I became so bitter and so cynical, I had a very hard time recruiting students for my program. And that was another reason I realized if I can't get out of this now, I'm never going to be able to be happy here. It's only going to get worse from there on out. So again, keep in mind, the work you do is absolutely important. Doesn't mean you have to do it the rest of your life. If you can find something to get you through and get a little bit of your energy back, it can really be helpful. But correcting this issue is going to take collaboration, employees and employers working together on this. And so hopefully everyone here, regardless of if you're in leadership or if you're a regular employee, you're able to take some of this back and start to work on these problems together. It's heartbreaking to me to see so many good people leaving the academy because of burnout. And I hope that we can make some changes in workloads and in situations to make it a little bit easier to stay where you are and for people to be happier and healthier in the workplace too. So at this point, we've got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions and discussion. So we can handle this a couple of different ways. I'm open to hearing what you share or what you came up with through the discussion prompts if anybody wants to share. If you've noticed signs of burnout in your colleagues or just any other general comments. So I think Melissa's been monitoring the chat and Q&A. So at this point, if you have anything you want to chat, put in the chat or ask or comment on, I'm happy to entertain those comments and questions.
I'll give the audience some time to digest if they want to ask any questions, but I cannot believe 180% increase risk of depression. That is huge. And it's interesting because I think when people think of burnout, they do think just mental health and just mental health. It doesn't mean anything else. But knowing that the physical effects that come from that, wow. And hopefully that pushes a few of us, at least that we're getting close to that point to seek strategies
Right.
in order to help ourselves, exactly, value ourselves in our lives.
Absolutely. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, it's very difficult to take care of anybody else. And a lot of times women especially try to be self-sacrificing and say, I don't have time to do any of the work myself to get better. But if you're really depressed, if you're really anxious, if you're having all these physical symptoms, eventually it's just going to get harder to take care of the people around you that you care about. So it's important to just take a break and figure out how to start managing some of those problems.
Yeah, the strategies, and I like that they were really applicable. It wasn't just, and diverse. It wasn't just, you need to quit your job and try something new. It was trying to manage the situations and understand kind of where we sit with that. So I really appreciate, I think, the strategies that came out of that.
So I think I see a question here under Q&A. Any advice for how to manage the distress caused by the prevailing anti-education rhetoric that is out there? Oh, that is an excellent one. Excellent one. I am distressed by the anti-education rhetoric that is out there as well. And just a little bit more about my background and perspective. I think a lot of people, whenever they realize I was a professor, make assumptions about my background, and maybe I was from like this privileged background or have family members who are PhDs. No, I was the first person in my family to go to grad school and grew up in rural North Alabama, where before I went to college was told, don't get too educated because nobody will want to marry you. So I totally understand this anti-education rhetoric. I grew up around it, and it's even worse now. To manage the distress caused by all of that, gosh, that's a tough one. I think going back to just the strategies that I mentioned, it's very difficult to counter all of those messages, right? Like we can't really actively counter that narrative that's going on, except for in our classrooms and in our homes and with our friends and family. And if you happen to be in a situation where you can promote education, where you can promote the value of free thought and of different perspectives, I think that's an important thing to do. I think about this a lot from a media studies perspective, because that's what I taught and that's where my brain goes. I think our society just as a whole is more fragmented now than it was. I think that our media landscape has shifted so much that it feels like we're so far apart, we're so distanced, and that really impacts our ability to engage in a civil discourse about any topic, especially when it comes to anti-education rhetoric. I would just encourage you to, every chance you have, stay informed, vote, talk to your students, talk to your colleagues, and do the very best you can. I think that might be one of the contributing factors to burnout. We hear messages all the time telling us that education isn't important, or people trying to tell us what to teach or how to teach things. It's very, very distressing. So I wish I had a better answer for you, other than really all you can do is take care of yourself. And when you encounter those messages and hear that sort of talk, definitely speak out against it to the best that you can, the best of your ability. And I see a couple of questions here in the chat. How do you deal with the guilt of leaving your job, knowing that doing so will make it harder for your colleagues that are still there? And also asking everyone, what are you going to do next? I'm just going to heal and take care of myself, and that should be enough. Yep, exactly. I had that exact thought and feeling, and it almost kept me from leaving. In fact, I left my job in June. I resigned in April to wrap up the semester. And I was meeting with my administrative staff, who I love dearly, sometime in February. And I said, man, I wish I could leave. I can't leave you guys. I can't leave you hanging. There's no way. I would never leave you. I'm so loyal to you because you are working so hard, and I love you and I care about you. And they staged an intervention. The three of my administrative staff came to my office the next week and said, do not stay because of us. We will be okay. You need to take care of yourself. And they were absolutely right. It helped alleviate my guilt. I think for me, I had to make a leap and say, I am not responsible for anybody else's happiness or anybody else's work. I am responsible for me and my experiences. The building, when I left, did not collapse. The department is still there. The faculty kept their jobs. They are still running, and I'm doing what I love, and they're hopefully happy too. So the way you deal with that guilt, again, it's up to you to take care of yourself. It hurts because you do care about those people. It was harder for my colleagues, but they made it, and they have to make their own choices as well. So I just recommend believing in yourself. And yes, what are you going to do next? Tell them you're just going to take time off and let that be it. It absolutely is enough. Absolutely. And good luck to you in your journey too. Do you have any advice for managing stakeholders' expectations for quick responses, almost constant availability? Yes, that happens too. I think you have to have an honest conversation about boundaries there. Sometimes that's difficult, if not impossible. I've definitely been in work environments before where that's the expectation, and if you can't meet it, then it's a problem. But I am not a fan of this expectation to respond immediately. And I think if that is the expectation that you have, I think you start to set boundaries around when you're available and how you're able to respond. I think that starts with a conversation that you might have with whoever your manager or your boss or your leadership is. Talk to people about how you are feeling burnout. There's research behind this, and you as a person need some time off, and you need some space, and you work until 4:30 or 5, and you will respond to messages the next day, and just stick to it. Let people know that that's your boundary, and it can be a very hard conversation. I know that's not always realistic, but I would absolutely try to have a conversation about that boundary. Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate your comment. Hey, Melissa, nice to see you too. So I have a couple of friends, I think, here in the audience. Appreciate you being here. Definitely burned out, but also must return to the job. I have to go back to the same situation and not sure how to do that. This is just a rest before I do that. So burned out, but must go back. I feel for you on that one as well. Any advice for that? I think you go into this, if you are in a situation where you're taking a break, you're taking a rest, develop an exit strategy. Brainstorm a little bit and see what's your exit strategy. If you really are dreading going back, you don't want to do it, this is not going to be something that brings you fulfillment or joy. If you can take a little bit of time, maybe a day, maybe you take a personal day or sick day or whatever, and develop an exit strategy. Figure out what it is that would help you get out, and try to follow through on that plan. Or if you can't get out, if you can't find a way out, make a plan for how you might make your work environment a little bit better. Is there anything you can do to make it better? Sometimes we get so caught in our heads and worried about this that we start to think there's absolutely nothing that can be done and it's hopeless. That might be true, but it also might not be true. So think about if that's the case too. And good luck to you. I hope you're able to find some happiness there. Thoughts on the role of allies in supporting women, burnout, or even better, the role of co-conspirators who can undermine these kind of inequities in the workplace. Yeah, just like with any social change, people in power are the ones who really have to put forth the effort to make things better. And I think in academic institutions, that's really difficult. So I think if you are in a position where you can make changes to make things better, I think first, don't assume you know how to make it better. Don't assume that you know what your employees need before you ask them. A lot of times managers and people who want to be allies make false assumptions about what their burnout employees need before they talk to their burnout employees. So if you're serious about this, if you're serious about supporting women colleagues and serious about trying to make burnout better, I think you have to make sure there's buy-in at all levels of your institution. And I think you have to have a serious conversation or series of conversations about what that might look like. Hey, Stephanie, I see you too. Yeah, these are great questions. Any other questions?
Did we get to the last one about the roles of allies in supporting women? Sorry, I was just responding to a different one. Yeah, that was the one that you just answered.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, one just answered too. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for being here. Do you have recommendations on how to leave your work environment on time without dismissing an employee or devaluing their question or need? Yeah, that's a great question too. I think you can do so compassionately and professionally and maturely. You don't have to run out of the office and say it's 4:59, I'm done today. One thing you can do, if somebody stops by your office for that quick question and you're on your way out the door, just say, I want to work with you. I want to help you with this. I am leaving work at this time. Would you please send me an email and I will get back to you and have more time and energy to deal with this. If you tell me this while I'm on my way out the door, I will forget. Or if you will send me an email, I will have it in writing and I will take care of this and be able to devote more time to help you out with this tomorrow. So basically let them know that they're concerned, their comment is important, but that also you are needing to go do other things. And that also can be kind of a chain reaction. I think that's kind of how we get into a situation where the expectation is constant communication and immediate responses, because one person on the email chain responds immediately, and then it gives the impression that everybody else has to do the same thing. So you might just need to be the link in the chain to bring it up in a meeting one day and say, I am bothered by the need for us to respond immediately. I would like for us as a group to talk about boundaries here and expectations. And same thing for you if you've got somebody who's trying to keep you after hours, or when you're trying to go on your way to do something else, just very politely say, I really want to talk to you about this. I agree this is an important issue. I'm unable to talk about it at this very moment. Can we find a time to discuss it when we both have more time for this, so that I can give you my full attention? Otherwise, I'll be distracted and unable to give you my full attention. All right, so it's 3:02. I know we're kind of out of time, but I did want to thank all of you for being here. I really enjoyed the conversation today. And I've got here the last slide. I am always open to talking to organizations and institutions. I do presentations like this for a living now, and it's a lot of fun. So send me an email if you have follow-up questions, or you can check out my website. You can scan the QR code there. It takes you to the contact me form. I would love to do this or other trainings. I do communication-based trainings as well. So if you need any trainings for your team on team building or small group communication or basic communication skills or interpersonal relationship building, I would love to talk with you about what we might be able to do together. So thank y'all so much for being here today. I didn't get to meet all of you, but do appreciate the questions and comments that you're able to share. And thank you again so much to Melissa and Velma and Sarah. It was a pleasure to present to your group today.
Thank you so much, Laura. I've got two really quick questions. So the first one is, can attendees get a copy of the slides? And secondly, can they ask you questions by follow-up via email? That's
Absolutely. Yes, I will. I'll send you the link to my slides, and you'll have my email address and contact info there.
Wonderful. Velma, can we put that on the website along with a copy of the webinar?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, y'all have a wonderful day. I think I don't know who to turn it over to close it out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone who showed up. If you want to learn more about the Women's Caucus, please go to our website and submit the join form, and we'd love to have you as members and be able to bring you more fantastic presentations from great presenters. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.